April 5, 1892. A private train sits waiting in the rail yard at Cheyenne, Wyoming. The blinds are drawn. The cars are loaded in the dark. Inside are 52 men. 23 of them are hired Texas gunmen, paid by the day to kill. The rest are some of the wealthiest cattle barons in America and the men who work for them. They are carrying rifles, ammunition, dynamite, and a list. On that list are 70 names, 70 men marked for death. The train pulls north out of Cheyenne under cover of darkness. No announcement, no warrant, no law. This was not a battle. It was not a feud. It was a corporate assassination campaign, funded by millionaires, protected by the government, and aimed at murdering every small rancher who dared to compete with them. And the only thing that stood between that private army and the names on their list was one Texas cowboy. To understand how 52 men came to be riding north with a kill list, you have to understand who owned Wyoming in 1892. After the Union Pacific Railroad cut across the southern half of the territory in the 1860s, a new kind of empire rose on the open range. Cattle. Enormous herds grazing on land nobody officially owned. Land that belonged, on paper, to the federal government, but in practice, to whoever was powerful enough to claim it. The men who built those herds were not simple ranchers. They were investors, bankers, British aristocrats pouring foreign money into American beef. By the 1880s, they had organized themselves into a single body, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. And the Wyoming Stock Growers Association did not just raise cattle, it controlled the territory. Its members included the acting governor, both of Wyoming's United States senators, judges, newspaper owners. The association decided who held office, what the courts ruled, and what the public was allowed to read. For years, this was enough. The barons ran the range and answered to no one. But then the homesteaders came. Ordinary families filing legal claims under the Homestead Act, fencing off small plots of the open range the barons considered their own. Cowboys who had worked for the big outfits began starting herds of their own. To the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, this was theft. So they invented a word for it. They called every small rancher a rustler, a cattle thief. It did not matter whether it was true. The label was the weapon. And once a man was branded a rustler, the most powerful men in Wyoming decided he could be dealt with however they pleased. By the spring of 1892, they had compiled a list of more than 70 of these so-called rustlers, and they had decided the time for words was over. If you want the real history behind the myths, subscribe. This channel exists to show you what the textbooks left out. Now, back to that train. On April 5, 1892, the invaders gathered in Cheyenne. 52 men in total. 23 were professional gunmen, recruited from Texas and paid $5 a day, plus a $50 bonus for every man they killed. The rest were cattle barons, their foremen, and a pair of newspaper reporters brought along to write the official version of events. The entire operation had a budget. $100,000, the equivalent of millions today, admitted and accounted for. This was not a mob. It was a corporation deploying capital to eliminate its competition. The train carried them north to a stop outside Casper. There, in the dark, they unloaded their horses and their supplies and switched to the saddle, riding hard into Johnson County, the heart of so-called rustler country. They had a primary target, a name near the top of the list. His name was Nate Champion. Champion was a 34-year-old Texas cowboy who had committed the unforgivable sin of starting his own ranch. Worse, he had begun organizing the small ranchers into an independent roundup, a direct challenge to the barons' monopoly on the range. To the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, Nate Champion was not a competitor. He was a problem to be solved. And on the morning of April 9, 1892, 50 armed men rode up to the small cabin on the KC ranch where Champion was sleeping and surrounded it. It was just before dawn. Inside the cabin were two men, Nate Champion and his partner, a cowboy named Nick Ray. The morning began quietly. Two trappers who had been staying at the cabin stepped outside to fetch water and were quietly captured by the surrounding gunmen before they could raise the alarm. Then Nick Ray walked out the front door. The moment he was in the open, the invaders opened fire. Ray was hit in the head and went down in the dirt outside the cabin. He was still alive, barely. What Nate Champion did next tells you everything about the man. He threw open the cabin door into the path of 50 rifles, ran out into the gunfire, grabbed his dying partner under the arms, and dragged him back inside. Bullets tore the ground around him. He made it back through the door alive. Nick Ray would die hours later on the cabin floor. And now Nate Champion was alone. One man in a single-room cabin, surrounded by 50 professional gunmen who had been paid to kill him. What happened over the next 12 hours should not have been possible. Champion held them off. Hour after hour, he moved from window to window, firing through gaps in the logs, driving the attackers back every time they tried to rush the cabin. The invaders poured round after round into the walls. Champion kept firing back. They could not get to him. And while the bullets splintered the logs around his head, Nate Champion did something almost no one in history has ever done. He picked up a pencil, and he began to write. The diary Nate Champion kept during the siege is one of the most extraordinary documents in American history. The first-hand account of a man calmly recording his own murder as it happened. The entries, in his own words, in sequence. Early morning. Me and Nick was getting breakfast when the attack took place. Two men here with us, Bill Jones and another man. The old man went after water and did not come back. His friend went to see what was the matter, and he did not come back. Nick started out, and I told him to look out, that I thought there was someone at the stable would not let them come back. Nick is shot, but not dead yet. He is awful sick. Later, Nick is dead. He died about 9 o'clock. He wrote about the men outside. He named the ones he recognized. He noted the smoke, the gunfire, the silence between attacks. Then, as the day wore on, boys, I feel pretty lonesome just now. I wish there was someone here with me, so we could watch all sides at once. And later still, when he understood what they were preparing to do. Well, they have just got through shelling the house like hail. I heard them splitting wood. I guess they are going to fire the house tonight. He was right. The invaders piled burning wood against the cabin and set it alight. And as the smoke filled the room and the walls began to burn around him, Nate Champion wrote his final words. Well, they have set the house on fire, and I guess I will have to go. The house is all fired. Goodbye, boys, if I never see you again. Nathan D. Champion. Then he tucked the diary into his vest, where it would survive the fire, ran out the back of the burning cabin with a rifle in his hands, and was shot 28 times before he hit the ground. The men who killed him pinned a note to his chest. It read, "Cattle thieves, beware." But the invaders had made a fatal mistake. The siege had taken too long, and word had gotten out. A passing rancher had seen the smoke and the gunmen at the KC ranch and ridden hard for the town of Buffalo to raise the alarm. What happened next was the one thing the cattle barons had not planned for. The people of Johnson County rose up. Within a day, the sheriff of Buffalo had deputized a posse of more than 300 armed men, ordinary ranchers, homesteaders, and townspeople, and rode out to hunt down the invaders. The 52-man private army, suddenly the hunted instead of the hunters, fled to the TA ranch south of Buffalo and barricaded themselves inside the buildings. Now it was the Baron's men who were surrounded. The posse dug in around the ranch. They began building a movable breastwork, a fortified wagon they could push forward under cover, right up to the walls, to storm the buildings. The invaders were trapped, outnumbered 6-1 and running out of time. And then, the United States Army arrived. The 6th U.S. Cavalry rode out from Fort McKinney, sent on the direct orders of President Benjamin Harrison, who had been woken in the night by telegrams from Wyoming's senators. The same senators who belonged to the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. The cavalry did not ride in to arrest the men who had murdered Nate Champion and Nick Ray. They rode in to rescue them. The 52 invaders surrendered, not to the posse that had cornered them, not to the county they had invaded, but to the army. They were taken into protective custody and escorted safely to Cheyenne. The killers were saved by the government that the killers controlled. Not one man was ever convicted for the Johnson County War. The case was moved to Cheyenne, the Baron's home ground. The county of Johnson was ordered to pay the enormous cost of feeding and housing the prisoners during the trial. The county went broke. Witnesses were paid to disappear or leave the territory. And eventually, the charges were quietly dropped. The hired Texas gunmen went home. The cattle barons returned to their ranches. The men who had assembled a private death squad, drawn up a list of 70 names, and burned a man alive in his own cabin, walked away free. But they did not win. Because Nate Champion's diary survived the fire. It was printed in newspapers across the United States, every word exactly as he had written it under fire. The nation read the account of an ordinary cowboy calmly facing 50 guns and saying goodbye to his friends, and the public turned against the barons with a fury no court ever could. The power of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association was broken, not by the law, which they owned, but by the words of the man they murdered. Tell me in the comments, if no one was ever convicted, was Nate Champion's diary justice or just a headstone? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. This channel exists for the stories America still doesn't want you to hear. Nate Champion knew he was going to die. He had no way out, no chance of rescue, and 50 guns trained on his door. So he did the only thing a man in that cabin could do to fight back. He picked up a pencil, and he made sure that we would remember. The diary was his weapon, and it outlived every man who pulled a trigger that day. Click the next video on the screen to watch more videos like this one.